Good morning, all. Let us begin.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Morning. So, today in the first half, we'll be trying to talk about a new concept called capitalism and its environmental part, which is called the natural capitalism. And after that, we will be also looking at a kind of revision of things that we have already discussed from the point of view of our coming examination. Right, so the first part is relating to a new concept called natural capitalism, which is in a way related to what is called the ecosystem services that we discussed already in the previous sessions. So, what is capitalism in the first place? Capitalism in the first place is an ideology. It is also a kind of an economic system, and basically, even the term capitalism is a little misleading because it only covers only a small part of the whole thing called the factors of production. As you know, there are four factors of production: the land, labor, capital, and organization. Somebody has the mic on. Can you please put it off? Yeah, I was talking about capitalism as an economic system and as an ideology. And in some way, this name or the term capitalism itself is misleading because it is, while it considers all the factors of production, it is kind of implying that it is only focusing on the capital part of four factors of production. So this has also led to a lot of opposition to the idea of capitalism. Basically, the better term would be the market economy for capitalism. Market economy, meaning that as little possible interference from the government as possible, so that the market determines its own demand, supply, and the price levels. This is a better term to denote capitalism. So, anyway, since that terminology is in parlance for a very long time, we will still use the term capitalism. And essentially, what we are talking about capitalism is basically an artificial capitalism. Remember the emphasis on the capital, the investments, the surplus that is already created from previous economic activities is what is called capital. And they are employed or invested or reinvested in productive ways. That is the whole idea of capitalism from a certain perspective. And then the markets will determine whether this particular investment has been successful or not, or whether those products or services that this investment gives is really that is demanded by the market. If not, the market will punish the investment. That's the idea. And so there is a natural way of selection and deselection by the nature itself, or maybe the economy itself, when you talk about artificial capitalism or the general capitalism that we talk in the economic terms. Now, this term is also borrowed to develop something called the natural capitalism, the idea of natural capitalism, because it seems that we have forgotten the primary investment on which we are surviving or building our own capitalism is the natural ecosystem. So that's why now we use this term natural capitalism. So there are two capitalisms now in our consciousness right now. The first one is the one which is artificially created in the economic idea of capitalism, of investment, reinvestment, and the returns, and the risk that we take in terms of investment, and the looking forward to of the proceeds of that investment in terms of profit and so on and so forth. The other capitalism is the natural capitalism we are going to discuss today, and that's based on the idea that there is a platform on which we have built the economic capitalism as well. And that's what we are trying to focus today on. And possibly also to see how much it is valued, in the sense whether it is valued at all when we consider our balance sheets and our books of accounts, right? So normally we don't consider the investment which is into the natural capital or the services that the nature gives us on which we have built our capitalism. And it is an attempt to bring about or bring into the books of accounts the value of the natural capital that nature so abundantly provides us as well. So you recall the Biosphere 2 experiments which we discussed earlier. Biosphere 2 experiments was an artificial enclosure and an experimental enclosure where we try to replicate the Earth and all its processes, right? So that was gave us a certain kind of understanding as to how much we are devaluing or not valuing the services that are provided by nature, which otherwise would take a lot of investment, and even with that kind of investment, we'll not be able to make that what is desirable for all of us, which nature provides free of cost. So that was the message of the Biosphere 2 experiments, right? And secondly, it talked about the natural resources and ecosystem services. Now, what was the revelation or the understanding that we have got from those experiments was the kind of ecosystem services which are not really valued. And the third important part is relating to the fact that we do not consider these services or the value of these services, the natural services that make it even possible for us to have an economy into the balance sheets and other books of accounts. So there's an imaginary calculation, or in fact, a calculation based in the on the journal Nature, estimating the value of all the Earth's ecosystem services to be at least $33 trillion per year. Or in other words, if we were to make all these things that nature provides us free of cost, it would cost about $33 trillion in a year, which is a huge number, as you know. So, but we don't consider that when we try to understand the implications of the present economy, which is kind of also led us to the discussion on sustainable development, because we have created a situation of unsustainability in the last 200 to 250 years, which is a very small time frame in the total geological time frame. So this is from an article by a person called Lovin, who is a academic in this field. So he proposes that some small changes in the way we run our businesses would make benefits both for today's shareholders and for future generations. Remember, our definition of sustainable development included future generations, development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. So we need to consider. So at the same time, we are not avoiding the duty of businesses to the shareholders. This is kind of midway between the interest of the present shareholders and the future generations also. So this is an idea which is being proposed. So this is called natural capitalism because it is what capitalism might become if its largest category of capital, or the natural capital, were properly valued. So this is an attempt to bring the value of the natural capital into the books of accounts as well. So what is it proposing? What are the different solutions that this approach is proposing? First of all, remember, we are trying to borrow the term capitalism into nature and nature's provisions as natural capitalism. And then it is assumed that we have already kind of compromised on the natural capitalism by depleting many of the resources and polluting our atmosphere and so on and so forth. Now, the solutions that are being proposed in order to gain traction on natural capitalism or somewhat of this kind of dramatically increasing the productivity of natural resources. Number one. That means we need to make some design changes at the production stage itself in the technology, and in wherever possible. So remember when we discussed about the environmental impact equation, it gave a formula: impact is equal to population, affluence, and technology. Now, how did technology contribute to the impact? That is one question that we are still kind of asking, because technology, we understand, can be both ways. It could be also helpful for the environment. And that's because of the fact that in the earlier times, in the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, technology was not geared towards environmental protection, but rather it was only to make whatever is that invention run. The concerns regarding environment never happened or occurred to those people in those times, when in the first few days of first few years and decades of industrial revolution. So we are trying to now think in terms of bringing that into the equation. That is, how does new technology emphasize environment as well? So in that case, your formula of I is equal to P AT, that is population, affluence, and technology. That the technology could easily come down to the come down to the denominator rather than the numerator, and that is most likely what we are intending with the new kind of technologies, which emphasize not only the inventions but also the environment, right? So wherever possible, is it possible to design things, the production processes including, and even the products themselves, designed in such a way that they save energy, minerals, water, forests, and so on and so forth? Is it possible to stretch the usage of these things by 5, 10, or even 100 times? Remember, this is, again, once again, I'm reminding that this was not the concern in the beginning. For example, if a locomotive was invented, in the initial days, the concern was only about moving that the whole thing, moving the locomotive in some way, much better than what it replaced. What it replaced was the horse-drawn carriages. Now, when the locomotives came in first with the steam and then with the other sources of power such as diesel and so on, the concern was not necessarily about conserving the environment, but rather to somehow replace the old technology. Right? So that is why, so there is a room for stretching. That is the point. There is a room for stretching these resources when we consider environment also into the equation. So, is it possible to do that, or is it possible to design, or is it possible to design the processes and products in such a way that we can extend and stretch the resources much further than it was originally designed for? So in this way, we can adopt a fresh approach to design that considers industrial systems as a whole rather than part by part. And that is going with our earlier discussion on the cyclic nature of the, the natural processes, because industrial way is a linear process at the end of which there are so many ways that we also try not to take into account, right? So that means companies can now replace old technologies with new ones, particularly with those based on natural processes and materials. So this is, in a way, kind of looking at nature and how nature works, and kind of mimicking nature that we are trying to introduce in this discussion on natural capitalism. So in a way, if we try to bring in the environmental protection into the equation, it is not going to cost more. In fact, it is going to cost much less. Right? So many people think that when you're trying to change the present system, it might incur additional cost. But whatever additional cost is being done in this case is going to come back in the form of reduced cost, or they're going to pay back in the form of reduced cost. So when you're trying to reduce wastage, we are also reducing the expenses. That means increasing the profits. So this idea of bringing in environmental protection into our business processes does not necessarily mean that it is going to be costly. It is in fact going to be less costly and in line with the business idea of reducing the cost and increasing the bottom line. Right? So there was this concept of diminishing returns at some time as you employ more and more of investment and resources, you will have diminishing returns. From that idea, now we have moved on to something called the expanding returns. The more you spend, the more you're going to save. That is the kind of idea. And that is in terms of whole system design. So you take into consideration the entire system, and wherever there are possibilities of reduction, you employ that, and that way you save on both the environment as also on the cost of the business. For example, lean manufacturing is an example. You must have heard about something like the Toyota way of doing things, Toyota's just in time. Even if you have not heard about it, probably you've heard about it in the normal discussions. I mean, the idea of bringing in the components only when it is required. In the case of Toyota, it is about the assembling of automobiles. So you bring about the items for assembly, the raw materials, the parts for assembly only at the time of assembling, and it is kept going without any disruption by providing things just in time. So this is the idea of something that is very closely linked to the idea of lean manufacturing also. So what is the advantage of bringing in raw materials only when it is required, as and when it is required, is that you save a lot of cost on the advanced purchases, and you also save a lot of cost on the storage and retrieval of those materials because it is coming straight to the assembly line, not having the requirement to store. Because in industrial organizations, the cost of storage and maintenance and retrieval is also very high. So when you eliminate that process, it is possible to improve the efficiencies in such a way that you don't have to incur any of those logistical costs of storage, maintenance, and retrieval. And that can be essentially, transferred. That savings can be essentially transferred to the consumer, and that's how Toyota is able to make affordable products which can compete easily with the other categories, other automotive companies, which against which the Toyota company, competes. So, this is the idea. One of the solutions is to bring in increasing the productivity of natural resources by modifying the products and processes. Another example is a company called Interface, which is making what is called interiors, right? So it is not, for example, carpet is one of their products, and they are not going to sell carpets, right? And okay, that's another example. Basically, they don't sell carpets, but they sell the service of carpeting. But in this case, there was in the process itself of the carpet manufacturing process itself, there are some modifications which they are doing, which gives immense returns. So, for example, choosing big pipes and small pumps rather than the other way around would make the whole system cost less to build, even before counting its future energy savings. Remember, it is in the process. When you build an industry, when you build a factory, it is going to stay there for almost say 10 to 30 years. So that means that once you design the pipes and systems in such a way that reduction in cost is going to come back through the entire lifetime of that factory. And this means that uh, by designing things, keeping in view the future or the cumulative reduction in expenses, you can both support the business as well as the environment, because when you mean that your expenses are less on energy and other expenses, it is also contributing to the benefit of the business as such. It's not just contributing to the environment, it is also contributing to the business. Then another innovation was to reduce the friction even before making the pipes short and straight. By making the pipes short and straight, let's say you have a whole piping system. The less the bends are, the it is possible to improve the efficiency of the pumping if you reduce the length of the pipes and also the reducing the bends, rather than make it crooked and long, make it short and straight. And this would be, again, you can see, imagine an industry or a factory where there are not many equipment, where the pipes are, there are, kilometers of pipes which are used in this kind of industries. You can imagine the kind of savings that happens with reduction in the length of pipes wherever possible, and also reducing the number of the bends which happen in the pipelines. This is an engineering solution. Basically, this is an engineering solution and also a management solution in a certain way. The advantage is that the gains are not just for a few days, but to the entire life of that particular factory. And again, it is easy to insulate when it is shorter, and that's saving another um, set of advantages by reducing the heat loss and repaying the insulation cost in a very short period of time. So, a number of such things which earlier in the beginnings were not considered is now being considered in the light of environment. It is not just protecting environment now, it is also saving the business a large amount of money, right? Another example is a very simple, method of, default setting on printers. All of you know what is a printer and a copier, and you also know what is single-sided printing and double-sided printing. In double-sided printing, you're saving the paper, right? So setting the default to, I mean, this is a huge company, AT&T is a huge company. Setting the default on all the office printers to double-sided reduces the cost by 15%. When you talk about billions of dollars, 15% is a huge number, right? So just by a small action, you can you can save money as well as the environment. This is the idea of find out wherever possible smaller advantages which accumulates into huge advantages. Like in recently, I read an article in the newspaper regarding the saving of plastic waste. That's in the case of, say, when you buy milk, you cut the corners of the plastic package in which the milk comes in. When you cut the corner, don't throw it away. I mean, rather, don't cut it fully. Let it hang on to the remaining part of the packet itself. In that way, you are saving a lot of money, which otherwise would pollute the environment, because this milk plastic covers can be recycled. So when you cut off the corner, imagine when a whole city is cutting off the entire corner of that, and it is going waste into the waste dump. It means that tons and tons of waste is in that way accumulated. Whereas if you don't cut it fully and let it hang on to the remaining portion of the plastic, it can also become part of the recycling part. Now, it's a small kind of action from our side which saves the environment to such an extent. I hope you got the example. All right, the second method is in terms of shifting to biologically inspired production models. The first one was dramatically increase the productivity of the resources. The second one is shifting to biologically inspired production models. In other words, closed loop production systems. We call it the cyclic models. right? In the beginning, we said nature follows a cyclic model. Now, in the industrial system, we call it a closed loop production system. It is modeled on nature's designs, and every output either is returned harmlessly to the ecosystem, like the environment, or it is becomes an input for manufacturing another product, right? So this way you reduce waste and maybe even eliminate the very concept of waste if you can create systems which are of cyclic nature. The third one is moving towards a solutions-based economy or business model, which means today we are following what is called a product-based business model. You sell a product and then you forget about it from the company side. But if the company is a solutions-based business model, then you think in terms of the value of your services rather than the value of your products. So instead of selling products, now you reconceive your business as selling the services, providing illumination, for example, rather than selling light bulbs. You can reconceive of a business of light bulbs into selling of services of light bulbs rather than selling the light bulbs, which means you're going to, you know, provide the lighting solutions rather than sell the bulbs alone, right? So the essentially the light bulbs belong to the company even after it is the service is sold. That means when it is uh, time to replace, the company does the replacing so that the service continues. And that is a model that we are thinking in terms of the service model rather than the product model, right? So it means moving from acquisition of goods as a measure of affluence to where well-being is measured by the continuous satisfaction of different expectations for quality, utility, and performance. See, the basic idea is that now today we measure the success of or affluence on the basis of how many things we have or what are our possessions. Whereas if you change that thinking in terms of how much well-being I have rather than possessions, this is in line with this kind of a solutions-based business model. So businesses can understand that, for example, now companies have started leasing automobiles rather than selling automobiles. You can pay a small amount and take a vehicle on lease, run it for yourself for say 3 or 4 years, and then eventually the company itself takes it back. So you get the service of transportation without owning automobile. At the same time, the company also gains by being able to recall it at the end of its life cycle and even process it properly for disposal. This is the third method. The fourth method is reinvesting in natural capital itself, that is protecting the environment directly. Right? Business must restore, sustain, and expand the planet's ecosystems so that they can produce their vital services and biological resources even more abundantly. So this is required and aided by the expanding human needs, rising costs of deteriorating ecosystems, and increased environmental awareness of consumers. Right? This is in a nutshell about the different methods by which we can consider natural capital protection. So once again, these are the four methods: dramatically increase the productivity of natural resources. Number two, shift to biologically inspired production models. Then move to a solutions-based business model and reinvesting in natural capital. So this is, in general, the idea of natural capital and how it can be utilized in businesses, protecting both the interests of business and environment. So one reason why this is not happening immediately is because of the accounting practices, right? For example, most companies expense their consumption of raw materials through the income statement, and resource saving investment through the balance sheet, right? So there is some tax implications on this, where it is easier to waste rather than to invest in fuel efficiency. So the details of it only the people who are familiar with the tax legislation would know. But otherwise, this is a distortion in the tax regimes. So we need to also rewrite the rules relating to the accounting, especially those relating to the tax regimes, and that would increase our, you know, attention to bringing the natural environment, making it much more healthier. Right? That is the idea. So basically, the whole discussion seeks to bring in natural capital to the appropriate place in the accounting system so that saving the environment is incentivized. That's the whole idea. It's a brilliant idea of taking care of environment without affecting the business as such. In fact, business also gains from protecting the environment, and that's a new kind of thinking. In fact, in the knowledge economy, it is not uh, anything else that brings in advantages, but new ideas, innovative ideas that brings about advantages in the new knowledge economy, and that's also kind of supported in this discussion on natural capitalism. Any questions?
Sir, sir, I didn't get that taxation part, sir. Like, why will they reward to waste? I mean, when an organization wastes resources.
Yeah, that is the whole thing because this is not conceived in this fashion as of now as to protect the environment because it is a peculiarity in the taxing regime. It's not intentionally done, but it so happens as of now, this is the way the taxation system happens. So, whereas if you change that particular provision into investments in protecting the environment, then there is an advantage which is likely to happen if only we change the law or legislation. So that's why, because it is not intentionally done, but due to the tax rules at the original time of the legislation, this so happens, but it has unintentionally caused damage to the environment. That's the meaning. So now probably this will be changed, or even it could be already changed because of this awareness.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Other questions? Other questions, please.